Okay, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us, and we are excited to have such a great group of participants and speakers with us today. And before we begin, we will go into a few housekeeping notes. The first one is, when you are joining through Zoom, we have seen in the previous webinars that the names are quite different. So if you could just rename your Zoom with your own name, or you can always put it in the chat box, your name, and we will cross check because we are trying to present certificates in the end to all those who are attending this webinar. And I feel some of you are joining as a group and with different emails. So just to have that, please just in the chat box, you can just put your name and where you are joining from while we go into introduction. And also keep your mic muted at all times unless you are to, you can speak, you can unmute and speak. And also if you have any questions and clarification, feel free to use the chat box throughout the webinar. So without further ado, we'll start the webinar. So just briefly about this webinar. So following on the first two webinars, first one we laid foundation on NbS, second one we went into IUCN's global standards, and today we'll delve deeper into mainstreaming NbS into policies, understanding and applying policies from global to national for effective strategy integration. And the overall expectation of this webinar is to identify key global, regional, and national climate, environmental, and biodiversity policies supporting NbS, particularly in the Pacific Islands. Understand how existing policies and framework intersect with NbS and influence strategy development. Learn practical approaches to integrating NbS into national policies, ensuring alignment with global commitments. Also, we'll explore case studies demonstrating effective NbS mainstreaming across sectors. And finally, develop advocacy strategies to promote NbS inclusion into policy framework. So today is all about policies on the NbS and what is happening, how can we mainstream. So that is the webinar for today. And just a quick look at the agenda. So this agenda was shared with you. I'll just briefly go over the agenda. So we will have we are now having introduction. After that, we will have our first speaker, who is Utale. She's a PPN project coordinator, and all the speakers will introduce themselves when they start their presentation. And she's from SPREP. So she will lay the foundation of this webinar, mainstreaming NbS International Policy Framework, followed by Antleya. She's a program manager in CCS at SPC. She will go from global to local, looking at all the relevant national, international, regional, and national frameworks for NbS. And then we'll come down to Ron Simpson. He's our adaptation advisor at NDC Hub, SPC, and he will look at NbS in NDCs, a strategic pathway for climate commitments. And then after that, we will have a breakout group session where we'll discuss what the three speakers have come across. And then after breakout group and presentation, then we'll move to Pasha. Pasha is our climate change and loss and damage advisor at SPC. And she will look at nature-based solution to address loss and damage in policies. And finally, we will have Kushal. He is a Pacific policy manager with CI, and he will look at policy review process. And then we'll have a Q&A session and followed by closing remarks and feedback. So these are the speakers. As we start the webinar, then you will meet all the speakers that are part of this expert panel today. Yes, thank you. Those who have just joined, I just informed others. If you are joining in group, please write your name in the chat box where you're joining from, and also so that it's easy for us to track the attendance of participants as the as we move ahead with the webinars. So without further ado, let's get started. I'd like to invite our first speaker, Ms. Utle Louis, who will be speaking on the topic of mainstreaming nature-based solution into national policy frameworks. Ms. Louis brings a wealth of experience from working in the region, and today we are honored to have her with us. And I would like to give the floor to Utle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rakeshni. Talo Falava, everyone. And thank you for joining this session. So just before I start, I will just share my presentation. So it comes on. All right. Sorry, Rakeshni, can you just confirm that you can see it?
Yes, Utle, we can clearly see it.
Ah, awesome. Thank you. Um, so my name is Utule Louis, and I am the project coordinator here at SPERP for the Promoting Pacific Islands for Nature-Based Solutions project, or PIPIN project. How we can better integrate nature-based solutions, or NbS, into national policy frameworks. This presentation will hopefully give you a foundational understanding of what policy mainstreaming is and its importance, particularly in our Pacific context. So as you saw on the agenda presented by Rakeshni, my session will hopefully complement the rest of our very valuable speakers that we have in today. I'll provide a basic overview of what policy mainstreaming is, with the particular focus on nature-based solutions, or NBS, as well as I'll share a little bit about our PIPIN project work that Rakeshni and I, together with our partners from GGGI and IUCN, are working on in the Pacific region. And this will hopefully set the scene as well with the following speakers. We will hear from Anne-Claire on sort of what the global context is and how those global commitments are influencing our regional and national policy development. Then we'll go into a specific example into a national policy landscape, looking at particularly at a planning tool such as the NDC, or the National Determined Contributions, and how that bridges the global goals with national action. And then we'll also hear from another perspective on how NBS is leveraged as a solution for addressing loss and damage in the context of climate change, which is very insightful for our Pacific region. And then finally, we will also be hearing at the practical application of NBS into project cycles, which I feel a lot of us here in this webinar today are in a way involved with. So with that, let's take a moment now to unpack what we really mean by policy mainstreaming. So at its core, it's about ensuring that any particular issue, in this case, we're talking about nature-based solutions, is not treated as a standalone concern. So instead of having a single isolated strategy or a plan that focuses on NBS, policy mainstreaming is about taking that issue and integrating it as a central consideration across all relevant areas of government policy and planning. So it really is the process of systematically integrating nature-based solutions across all sectors, such as environment, infrastructure, health, education, risk reduction, just to name a few, and at all levels of government, right from your federal or your national ministries, right down to your local or provincial councils. So for mainstreaming to be effective, governments do play a central role they need to create what we call an enabling environment, which is a combination of policies, institutions, or laws, regulations, and especially financing mechanisms that can make it possible and attractive to adopt nature-based solutions. And this can involve either updating environmental or climate change legislation to recognize nature-based solutions as a valid climate or development intervention. It could be including nature-based solutions indicator in the national planning and budget tools. It can be providing financial incentives or technical guidance for local governments or provincial level or even private sectors to invest in nature-based approaches. So ultimately, policy mainstreaming helps to embed nature-based solutions into the day-to-day workings of governance, making it, a normal, expected part of how we respond to challenges, whether it be climate change, biodiversity loss, sustainable development, or food security. So now let's take a closer look. This slide shows a typical national policy framework hierarchy, and this hopefully helps us visualize and understand how different policies are structured and connected across different levels of governance. So at the very top of the pyramid there in the purple, we have our legislations and laws, and right underneath it is our regulations. So this sets the highest level of governance. Integration at this level would mean that the issue is mandated by law. And we all know the saying that no one is above the law. So this would solidify the issue of nature-based solutions really as the highest part of the governance structure. So, and then below that, and also a common practice in countries when they do mainstreaming of any particular issue is they target them in the national level policies. So these plans or policies often state the national vision or commitment through a long-term strategic plan. So these high-level guiding documents are often looking at 10, 20, or even 30 years ahead. And this really outlines the country's ambition, around a said issue. So in this case, nature-based solutions. This sets the overall direction and values for all subsequent policies underneath that. So examples here can be, national strategic development plans, or we have national environment policies, national adaptation plan, national health policies, nationally determined contributions, things like that. So those are all examples of national level plans. So from then on, these visions and commitments are translated into sector-specific strategies. So you'll have sectors, for environment, health, infrastructure, water, agriculture. These sector segregation and specific documents then really start to define the roles and sector-specific activities that all can achieve the national vision set in the national level policies. So, and then we come at the base of the hierarchy. We have, our local governments, our ministry, agencies, strategies, and plans. Now, these are really crucial because this is where the national priorities get translated into local action on the ground by the specific offices and departments, where they can lead as well as support communities where the real change happens. So effective mainstreaming of nature-based solutions into this level through your operational or implementation plans of ministries and agencies means that the commitments that we have set at national level can be broken down into specific activities into each ministry or department annual work plans. And through these work plans, they can be allocated funds either from the national budgets or even request funds through global funds to implement these activities. So when we talk about mainstreaming, it really is important that if we are to effectively mainstream nature-based solutions, that these are present and visible at every level of the policy hierarchy. And I have on the screen here, just as an example only, of a situation in a country, Wakanda here, for example, where we see how nature-based solutions could be effectively integrated. So at the very top, we have, either the Environment Management Act or Climate Change Act, where nature-based solution is solidified as a relevant approach where possible to address either biodiversity or climate change adaptation and resilience. Then we come down and there has been developed very specifically some management regulations or climate change regulations. And then at your national level, we have the Wakanda National Climate Change Policy 2025 to 2035. And here, ecosystem-based adaptation, which is a type of nature-based solutions or a subset of nature-based solution, is identified there as an approach to address a very specific issue, which is coastal resilience. And then further than that, then a specific sector, infrastructure in this case, has developed their Wakanda Infrastructure Sector Plan. And very specifically from that sector plan, they have a guideline on green coastal infrastructure, which is a detailed strategy of how they've taken the commitment of EBA as an approach and really defined it in terms of their infrastructure activities. And then from that sector plan, we have the Wakanda Ministry of Infrastructure Corporate Plan 2025, which then sets the activity for that year, which is coastal restoration and replanting of 3 different districts within Wakanda. So this is an example of how you can take an issue and integrate it at different levels and then have that interconnected all the way down and also bottom up through a policy framework of a country. So that really shows that, mainstreaming sometimes isn't just a concept, and you don't make a particular issue such as, or I mean, a theme or approach as nature-based solutions, just a word on paper, but it can be a real operational part, like of how governments plan, budget, and implement their work. So why is it so important to mainstream nature-based solutions? And I've just summarized here 4 particular points. So let's start with policy effectiveness. Mainstreaming nature-based solutions means embedding them into the fabric of policy design and not just treating it as an afterthought. So this allows policies to be grounded in the realities of local ecosystems and also community needs, making them far more likely to succeed. So when you consider nature-based solutions from the outset, policymakers can better anticipate risks, such as climate impacts or ecological degradation, and develop responses that are context appropriate, evidence-based, and resilient. So second point is that it can promote sustainability in really the truest sense. They, and nature-based solutions offer long-term adaptive approaches rather that simultaneously address environmental, social, and economic challenges. And when we mainstream across sectors like urban planning, agriculture, water management, nature-based solutions can allow decision makers to move away from short-term fixes and instead building systems that are more resilient and that can really adapt and evolve with changing conditions. And most importantly, that can support both people and nature over time. And then third, nature-based solutions, can help countries fulfill both national commitments as well as international commitments. And many of our countries have signed up or are part of the global agreements like Paris Agreement and CBD or Convention on Biological Diversity, and also the SDGs or the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically promoting the use of NbS. So when we integrate into our own national plans and policies, our governments are also, our countries are better positions to meet these targets. We can demonstrate, leadership on the global stage, as well as we can unlock international support for funding mechanisms. So, and finally, mainstreaming nature-based solutions really helps to break down policy silos and We see this in our countries very often that sometimes we, especially agencies and ministries, tend to operate independently, even when their work overlaps. So integrating NbS across the sectors really encourages collaboration, coordination, and this really does lead to more coherent strategies and reduces duplication, avoids contradictory policies, and it really does help to bring the stakeholders together around shared goals. So yeah, these are some key factors or key reasons on why mainstreaming, especially nature-based solutions, is really important. So with that, I just wanted then to share a little bit of our PIPIN work, the Promoting Pacific Islands Nature-Based Solutions Project. Um, oh, sorry, this slide is just talking a little bit more about those factors on why it's so important. Yeah, I'll just go to the next one. So this is about the Pippin project that this webinar is also an activity of, but I just wanted to speak more about the activity there on integrating nature-based solutions into regional and national frameworks. So the Pippin project is actually implemented by 4 partners. It's IUCN, SPREP, Triple G, and SBC, and it is funded by Aotearoa New Zealand and FAT. And it is in the name, and the key objective of the Pippin project really is about strengthening and promoting Pacific Islands NbS. And those are the key outcomes, the 3 outcomes, but I wanted to speak more about the work in mainstreaming. So we are working across 3 countries in the Pacific: Fiji, Vanuatu, and Tonga. And so far, for these particular countries, they have started some of their work on how they had wanted nature-based solutions to be integrated within their national policy frameworks. And within Fiji, the work that we are doing is working alongside the Itauke Land Trust Board, which is the body that looks after all the customary and traditional land ownership of Fiji, which for context is about 86% of Fiji's land is under customary tenureship. So we are working with TLTB to mainstream nature-based solutions into their customary land leases, particularly their land agreement conditions. And this is through developing a natural resource and environment policy, which can help sort of green their lease conditions and help them have some measures in place that can protect their natural resources when they are leasing land. So in this particular case, this is a policy instrument within the TLTB organization. For Vanuatu, we are working in supporting the integration of nature-based solutions into the development of Vanuatu's first ever national adaptation plan. So this is actually a national level plan. And we hope that by integrating nature-based solutions in here, the sectors will all then have to align its plans to the NAF objectives as well as the NbS objectives within this national plan. And for Tonga, this is fresh off the discussions. We are having discussions with the country to have a look at its joint national adaptation plan, in particular with the subsector of agriculture, fisheries, forests, and food. So this is still under discussion, but we might also be targeting a national level plan for its integration. So that is just a snapshot of what we are doing in the countries. And I just wanted to finish off this session by just presenting very briefly on some challenges that we've seen in the countries that we've worked with, and also with some studies around the Pacific on what challenges are present in policy mainstreaming. And these are really around coordination. It is often really difficult to sort of get that coordination in between government ministries and agencies, and also coordination between the different levels of planning. And efforts around things can often become fragmented. Another issue in policy mainstreaming is the timing. So policies in each of the countries typically follow a set review cycle. For example, if it's a 10-year plan, there's a review cycle within the 5th year, and trying to amend them outside those set review cycles are really complex and often quite costly. And speaking of costs, funding is also an issue. It's not particular just to implementing nature-based solutions projects or implementing the policy objectives, but it also relates to it costs money to amend these policies and building capacity around the policies. Excuse me. And the other key challenge that we found is political will. So without, leadership or long-term commitment from decision makers, mainstreaming can, often be challenging and underutilized. And then we come to the last point, which is capacity. So, and this means both institutional and human. A lot of places we always have challenges in capacity, and many of our governments and countries need technical experience. We need more data and more tools to effectively plan and implement and mainstream nature-based solutions at scale. So with those points, those are just some of the key challenges we are seeing at the moment. And hopefully with these points in mind, it would help set the scene for our upcoming next presenters. But that is it from me. Thank you very much. And yeah, I will be happy to take on questions when the appropriate Q&A session comes in. But yeah, thank you. Back to you, Rakeshni.
Thank you, Tale, for highlighting how NbS can anchor national policies. This raises a critical questions like what barriers do you face in your country's policy landscape? Is it funding, coordination? So we'll explore this in our breakout groups that is coming out later. But first, how do these national efforts connect to global commitments? And Claire will map this big picture for us. Over to you, Anne Claire.
Hi, everybody. So let me just share my screen. Okay. So good morning, everybody. I'm very happy to be there. So following Utale's presentation, which has been showing how it's working at the national level, more specifically, I will present you what are the global, international, and regional commitment, and especially how NbS are linked to this one. So first of all, as you may know, there are three main multilateral environmental agreements. The first one is the Paris Agreement. Paris Agreement is on the UNFCCC Convention on Climate Change and its Paris Agreement. So the main purpose of this convention and agreement is to really to limit the global temperature to 1.5 degrees. And NbS is for sure a solution that has been integrated as a way to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement, especially on the mitigation side, where we can, for example, forest preservation, coastal wetland restoration, sustainable agriculture are contributing to mitigation. On the adaptation side, protecting communities from climate change is also something that can be done through nature-based solutions. The second one is the Convention on the Biological Diversity, UNCBD. And this is mainly around conserving the diversity to promote its sustainable use and ensure equitable sharing of benefit. CBD has been a little bit more reluctant to integrate the terms of nature-based solution, but it has been integrated in the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. which has been endorsed recently, and in which we have lots of different targets, including the target 8 and target 11. Target 8 is around the way to minimize the impact of climate change and ocean acidification on biodiversity, and NbS is clearly mentioned as a solution. On target 11, it's around the restoration, maintaining, and enhancing nature contribution to resilience, and they both are mentioning the nature-based solution. So the next one is a little bit, yes, it's the Sendai framework. So the Sendai framework is really focusing on disaster risk reduction, and it's a comprehensive framework with achievable targets and a legally based instrument for disaster risk reduction. And the links to the nature-based solution in the Sendai framework is around natural infrastructure to reduce vulnerability to hazards. And so NbS is really something which has been at the core of the Sendai framework as a solution. The next one is the 2030 agenda, and it's 17 related sustainable development goals, and it has been adopted in 2015. It's really the global plan of action toward a more sustainable future, focusing on end poverty, protecting the planet, and ensure peace and prosperity for all by 2030. The links to NbS are really obvious, as you can see in the presentation of the SDG. Biosphere is then recognized as a kind of a precondition for social justice, economic development, and sustainability. So at the bottom of all SDG, you have SDG 13, which is climate action, 15, which is life on land, and SDG 14, which is life below water and clean water. So nature-based solution, this SDG really makes nature-based solution effective instrument to address the sustainability-related challenges in a really integrated manner. Also to mention that we are now in the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration until 2030, which is really focusing in close collaboration with the CBD framework, GBF, focusing on the preventing and reversing the degradation of ecosystems. And this ecosystem UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration directly promote NbS. If we now go to the regional level, the Blue Pacific 2050 strategy. So this is really a unifying long-term vision adopted by the Pacific Island Forum leaders in 2022 to guide the regional cooperation and collective action towards a resilient, peaceful, and prosperous Pacific. And the strategy is a kind of a strategic pathway for sustainable development, focusing on 7 thematic areas, including environmental integrity, climate change and disaster resilience, ocean and natural resources, but also peace and security and governance. So the link to NbS are really obvious in the Blue Pacific 2050 strategy, linking healthy ecosystems with sustainable economic development and cultural integrity. Another regional strategy, which is quite important, is the Pacific Island Framework for Nature Conservation and Protected Areas. So it has been approved before the GBF, which is quite interesting, in November 2020. And it's really strongly aligned with the Global Biodiversity Framework. And we are maybe happy to know that as it has been endorsed before the GBF, it has influenced a little bit the international GBF. So this framework is really identifying key priorities for nature conservation and effective management of protected areas. But its scope is very internationally broad and flexible, allowing for adaptation to local, national, and regional context. So the links to the NbS is also obvious there, as it is mentioned as one of the key action identified to implement properly this strategy. Another regional strategy which is quite important is the framework for the resilient development in the Pacific. So this is linked to the Sendai framework at the international level, and it's a voluntary, non-political framework that supports coordination and action on a number of key issues related to both climate change and disaster risk management in the region. It's also quite interesting to note that this framework has been endorsed before the Sendai one, and I'm quite proud to say that the Pacific has been maybe a little bit in advance of the international level, providing this kind of regional input. So this framework has 3 strategic goals: strengthening integration, adaptation, and risk reduction, low carbon development, and reinforcing disaster preparedness, response, and recovery. What is quite useful also, this FRDP has an associated standard called the Pacific Resilience Standard, which helps monitor each action to see if it's fully aligned with the FRDP. The PRP is a kind of coordination mechanism supporting the implementation of the framework. And it's a multi-stakeholder platform with civil society, private sector, youth development partners, regional organizations for sure, and government. And the PRP is really there to enhance the coordination and strengthen regional and national capacities. And the PRP really promotes inclusive and collaborative implementation of NbS throughout different kind of tools, including technical support, innovation platform, and so on. If we go now to at the national level, so we have 2 main kind of policies or plan. The NAP, which are for climate change, which is a development at the national level of long-term strategy to reduce vulnerability to climate change. And NbS can be included, as it has been shown by UTLA, as a cost-effective and culturally appropriate solution for adaptation. Countries usually have also NBSAPs, so focusing on biodiversity, and it's a list of priorities, national priorities to conserve biodiversity. And for sure, countries are free to include in this NBSAPs NbS, as it's really at the core of biodiversity conservation and healthy ecosystem. At the national level, we also have the climate change policies, and climate change policies is really the core national policies around climate change to address the impact of climate change and ensure climate resilience development. And countries can also develop disaster risk reduction or DRM plan, which are more related to the FRDP and Sendai, to reduce the exposure to hazards. And NbS are clearly there to maintain natural buffers to protect the communities from all climate change related impact. We also have NDC. So NDCs is more a mandatory commitment that the countries are providing to the UNFCCC every 5 years. And it's really the core national commitment for countries to contribute to the Paris Agreement, including emission reduction, but also adaptation targets. So lots of countries, thanks to the support also by, for example, the Kiwa project or the PIPIN project or regional agencies, have included in their NDCs ecosystem-based mitigation and adaptation, and NbS. And I will also let the floor to my colleague Ron, who is working for the Pacific Regional NDC Hub, and who will present in details what the NDC Hub is doing to support our countries for their climate change commitment. And yes, that's all. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Anne-Claire. You have shown us how international agreements cascade down. Now let's get a bit practical, and Ron Simpson will unpack how NbS aligns with the heart of Pacific climate action, that is our NDCs. So can we have Ron?
Yeah, thank you, Rakeshni, and a very good morning to you all from the NDC Hub here in Suva. It's a bit overcast today in Suva. I hope the sun is shining wherever you're linked in from. And yeah, just want to say thanks to Utule for setting the scene, and thank you as well to Anne-Claire for giving us the big picture overview. It's always good to look at what's happening on the global level and then down to the regional level, and then all the way to what's happening on the ground at a national level. I remember saying that one of my lecturers mentioned to me some time back, it's good to think global and to act local. And so it's very important that we have a global perspective and regional outlook, which what Utule and Anne-Claire so elegantly done this morning. And then, you know, we focus at the national level. This is great because we need to align. We need to align the strategies, the policies, the plans, because this will help us garner funding, and this will help us not duplicate efforts and really bolster our efforts on the ground. So thanks again, ladies. Let me share my screen. By the way, it's really good to see a lot of familiar names on the screen, from Tonga, from Vanuatu, from Fiji. And good as well to see some unfamiliar names. This is what the forums are for, where we get to connect, get to know each other. Can you see my screen, or my presentation, sorry? Yeah, can I get a thumbs up? Because I'm not sure if... you can see my notes as well. You can see my... how you can... Hang on. Just a moment. Come on, don't give up on me, my screen. Just trying to share this again. And then open this up. Sorry. Sorry, maybe Rakesh, can you just share it from your end? Sorry, I got some backup here. Thank you very much, Pasha, for the help.
Yeah, if it doesn't, then I'll share it on my site.
Just one more moment,
Yeah.
Rakeshni. Thank you. Thank you for your patience. Okay. We don't want to share my notes. Yeah. We don't. Okay. Yeah. How does it look from your end, guys?
Yes, great. Now we can see it.
You can see, yeah? Okay. All right, Seth. Thank you so much. Thank you, Pasha. Thank you for... Yeah, Seth, I think that's the one that's sharing. Seth? Yeah. Seth, Rakeshni, you can see everything now? All good? Everybody set? Okay. Sorry for the little speed bump. Man, thank God for some very tech savvy members of the team. But anyway, yeah, this is it. And so I'll be talking briefly on nature-based solutions in our NDCs. I'm pretty sure most of you know what the NDCs are. These are our nationally determined contributions. This is our climate pledges that all of the countries are bringing to the table to help us achieve our climate targets, the mitigation targets, and as well as our adaptation targets. Yeah, so I'll be talking a bit on the strategic pathway for climate commitments. And if you can see the little boy, I think this captures us in the islands. Yeah, we are on the boat, looking out to the land, looking to nature to help us achieve these targets. And I know pretty much many of us have grown up, using medicine as nature-based solutions, using nature to build our homes, using nature for water. And this is us bringing to the table our need to work with nature to help us achieve our climate commissions. And so at the NDC Hub, we provide support to our 14 member countries in the region. Can you see the 14 countries? Yeah, okay, great, awesome. And to our friends and colleagues in Vanuatu and in Fiji and in Tonga, we provide support to our country officers all across the region. And the Regional Pacific NDC Hub was created by the Pacific leaders and for the Pacific to help our Pacific islands achieve our NDC targets. And so in the different countries, we have our NDC Hub focal points. And so in Vanuatu, we have Director Nelson. I'm sure some of you are familiar with him. In Fiji, we have Ranjila. She's our climate change focal point. And in Tonga, we have Director Luisa. I'm sure some of you are also familiar with that. And so we provide support to our countries to help achieve our NDC targets. So moving along, I stole this little piece from Anne Claire just to kind of bridge and continue on episode 3 of the story. And so the national determined contributions, the NDCs, they outline each country's climate commitments under the Paris Agreement back in 2015, including emission reduction, mitigation, and adaptation targets. And it's linked to the nature-based solutions. And Claire already mentioned this, but I want to mention it again for emphasis because of our role at the hub. Many Pacific NDCs, they highlight ecosystem-based mitigation and adaptation. We need to be relevant, right? And so in the Pacific, we have a lot of adaptation issues that keep affecting our lives and our livelihoods. Nature-based solutions like mangrove conservation, reforestation, or sustainable ocean management, they contribute to both emissions reduction and climate resilience, especially in island ecosystems. And you know what? What's really great is that all of our Pacific Island countries are jumping on board in working with nature. NDCs integrated with the nature-based solutions. And so this is a snapshot in Vanuatu from the NDC. Nature-based solution approaches are emphasized through forest conservation, agroforestry, mangrove protection, reforestation, and coral reef preservation. And there's a whole lot of words there, but let me read the second highlight. Vanuatu not only aims to enhance carbon sinks, but also ensure food security, protect biodiversity, and reduce climate vulnerability through ecosystem stewardship. This positions Vanuatu as a leader among Pacific nations in integrating NbS across its NDC framework. So awesome shout out to our friends and family in Vanuatu. And in Tonga, again, this is a snapshot of what's in the NDCs: planting 1 million trees, promoting agroforestry, expanding forest cover. Tonga supports ecosystem restoration, so on, to help with carbon sequestration. And then it's great to see that it's on the land, but there's the marine component as well to NDCs and NbS, marine protected areas and special management areas to 30% of its EEZ. Again, this feeds into the big picture, the international strategies of 30 by 30, right? 30% protected areas by 2030. So it's great to see this being reflected in the Tongan NDC. And then lastly, Fiji, prioritizing nature-based solutions to mitigate the impact of flooding and cyclones. Public infrastructure is resilient to cyclones and floods, prioritizing nature-based economically viable solutions. So it's really encouraging to see these are our countries on the call today, and that there's this alignment, alignment to nature-based solutions and integration with national, regional, and international policies. But this is just a snapshot, right, folks? This is just a snapshot of NDCs and nature-based solutions. You can go to the UNFCCC website and you can download the NDCs of the different countries. That will give you more insight into the NDCs. All right. Why is integrating nature-based solutions into our NDCs important? It is estimated that nature-based solutions can contribute to 37% of the mitigation needed by 2030 to meet the Paris Agreement targets. So again, emphasizing what Utule and Anne-Claire have mentioned, very important to partner with nature. And we've been doing it all along, but it's time to be more strategic, more intentional about how we can shape our policies and our frameworks around this. And looking at the different components of NDC, you see nature-based solutions in the mitigation targets, and you see nature-based solutions in the adaptation vision. So this is what's being brought on board little by little by the countries. All right, now taking a look at nature-based solutions in the NDCs at a bigger scale. There you go. Look at all those green patches on that map. A total of 105 nations, or 84% of all updated NDCs, they commit to restoring or protecting ecosystems, right? So it's not only just us in the Pacific, it's the whole world. They're coming on board. At first, when the first NDCs were released, there was so much more mitigation and less adaptation. And then around the second NDC, there were 2/3 mitigation and 1/3 adaptation commitments from the countries. Now, most recently, after NDC 1.0, NDC 2.0, there's around 45% adaptation commitments from the countries and about 55% mitigation. So it's great that we can show this great balance with mitigation and adaptation targets. This is an increase from the 78% of the first round of NDCs. So more and more, we're seeing more nature-based solutions being reflected in our NDCs. And you look at those red dots, the term nature-based is explicitly mentioned in these countries' NDCs. Nature-based. So moreover, 41% of all revised NDCs, 50 countries, explicitly use the term nature-based solutions. So it's great, especially with us in the Pacific. Adaptation issues are real issues on the ground. So nature-based solutions being aligned to our Pacific Island NDCs is critical. I'm drawing close towards the end of my presentation. And so this is just a history, more than 10 years of ambition. And you see the intended NDCs back in 2015 and NDC number 1. So every 5 years, the NDCs are reviewed and improved. So the first 5 years between 2015 and 2020, you have NDC number 1. Between 2020 and 2025, you have NDC 2.0. And so the countries are refining and improving their NDCs. Okay, what really matters most? What aligns with our country priorities? What aligns with our regional and international strategies? And so we're at NDC 2.0. 2025, this year, to 2030 is when we submit our NDC 3.0. This is another opportunity for us to even refine that even further, to ensure that we've got targets that we can hit by 2030 or by 2035. So this is just a small snapshot of our little journey with the NDCs. My last slide, NDC 3.0. So this is the way forward. I'll try to paint a picture so that we're on a journey together. So NDC 3.0, 2025 to 2030, a strategic pathway for climate commitments. And so this is insights from Climate Promise 2025. I'm just going to show a few snapshots of what Climate Promise 2025 came up with. This is an initiative by UNDP to help countries achieve their NDCs, and they give summaries and updates of this. And you can access this. Rakeshni will kindly provide links later on to all of this to help us keep track of our NDCs and insights along the way. Yeah? NDC preparation in developing countries. And so to date, 18 NDCs have submitted. This is NDC 3.0. As of February 2025, we have 18 NDCs submitted. This is on a global level. I think only one country has submitted their NDCs in the Pacific Islands, in the 14 countries, and that's the Marshall Islands. So they've submitted their NDC 3.0. The other countries are still updating and still being reviewed. All right, so it's great that we are on track. And I think this closes around September, the submission of our NDCs 3.0. And so we've got a bit of work to do between now and then. And a trend that is emerging is NDCs are as a vehicle to align biodiversity and climate targets. And so this is a trend that's emerging. The case for integrating nature and climate action is clear. So everybody's realizing, you know what, we need to work with nature just as we have from the very beginning. So that's really great to hear. 35 countries are making a focused effort to link climate and nature in their new NDC targets and measures. You can read up on that. NDC preparation processes can further strengthen climate-nature linkages, leading to higher ambition and better quality of our NDCs. Okay, I think this is great for the way forward on further developing a strategic pathway for climate commitments and integrating nature-based solutions into our NDCs. And I hope that this provides enough context and enough information to give you some understanding of the work that we're doing and the kind of support you can provide to your national governments. Thank you so much. I give this time over to Rakesh Pinaka.
Thank you so much, Ron. Your examples of NbS in NDC is great. Now let's turn the theory into action. So we'll break out into groups to tackle some questions. But before that, I would like to quickly give this floor to Jacinta. We will have a photo session. So if you could, we'll just give 1 or 2 minutes for this photo session, and then we will move on to the breakout session. Okay.
Hello. Hello, everyone. Requesting if everyone could turn on their cameras and give us a big smile so that I can take some snaps of the participants. So it will be like various shots because I'll have to go each time. I can't have everyone all together. So requesting everyone to smile. 1, 2, 3. Perfect. Next. Smile. Perfect. Smile. Perfect. Smile. Perfect. Smile. There are a lot of participants, so I'll take random clicks. Okay, great. Everyone's covered now. So thank you, everyone. So now we will break into our breakout groups.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Jacinta. So now we'll break out into a group. So I have some questions for you, which was posted in the chat box. And these are the questions that we have. So what are the top 1 or 2 challenges for the Pacific countries in adding NbS to national policies? And how can NbS fit better into Pacific climate plans? And what one action to speed up NbS in the Pacific? So now I will allocate you into breakout groups, and you'll be given 15 minutes to work in your group. So just a brief, from the last feedback we got from the participants is that some of the participants in the breakout groups, they do not talk, they do not unmute, they do not participate. So just since we are working in collaboration, this group work is for networking and working in collaboration. So please give your views and thoughts, and also just select one person who will present after this 15 minutes of breakout group. So you will now move into your breakout groups, and after 15 minutes, then you'll come back to the main group to discuss your findings. Thank you, everyone, and welcome back to the main session. I hope you had a quick and fruitful discussion on the 3 questions that were posted. So now it's reporting back, and I will give the floor to the groups who wants to report back, and maybe we'll have at least 2 presentations looking at the time. But I'm sure that you have had a good discussion, and I would like you to, those who are not able to present it, please put it in the chat box so others can see. So any volunteers, which group want to discuss your findings on the discussion you had? Please unmute and you can go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our group had mainly discussed point 1 and 2, that is regarding top 1 or 2 challenges for the Pacific countries in adding NbS to national policies, and 2 as well, how NbS can fit into Pacific climate plans. So the first one we checked and we discussed more on the outdated systems in policy and planning as well. And secondly was for lack of funding. This affects NbS's national, plans that they have for the long-term development. Maybe outdated systems do not comply or hinder their progressive efficiency to implement these plans with, local government. And the lack of funding, this can also hinder the project's fund that can be mandated for future development plans. And for the second one was how can, NbS fit into Pacific climate plans. First of all, the main thing that NbS can link is to indigenous and community knowledge. The better they have the understanding of the local people, their knowledge and their heritage, they can recognize this and use traditional practices that the communities are already using, maybe help them development or help them better their knowledge about their traditional practices. We weren't able to discuss point 3, but I'm happy to hear what other groups discussed that on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Group 1. That was very important on traditional knowledge that you say you touched on. Can we have another group to present?
From our group, can you hear us? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can clearly.
Okay. From our group, let's say this group number 2. The first question here, the challenging points that we discuss here is that the NbS is quite new, and then so I think the lack of awareness here between the countries. So I think we need to let the countries understand and let the countries focus and understand the meaning of this NbS and also the concepts of the NbS ideas. And also we need to promote it, still push it and promote it, the awareness of the NbS. We don't really touch the second questions, but we know we need the practitioners understand it better. And for the third questions, we had the need more funding, and we need the expertise to be there, and the technical funding to be there, and also the awareness to promote it with the to promote the NbS, to include in the plans for the Pacific to use. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And can we have the next group to present? Any volunteers?
Okay.
Okay, for side.
Our group have identified the two challenges. The first one is the institutional framework. We have discussed this, that the institutional framework needs to be well addressed so that people are well informed and they have the clarity of all the institutional frameworks that relates to the nature-based solutions, so that people will have the understanding of how to manage their resources in a sustainable manner. And secondly, we have identified the traditional knowledge, which plays a very, very vital role in terms of the management, the uses of the resources, which needs to be aligned with the policies at the national level. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the three groups that you have presented. And for the rest of the groups, looking at the time, I think we will go ahead with our rest of the presentation, but I would kindly request you if you could just put the discussion on the chat box so that others can see. So, so after this, I could see that the discussion, I know the time was less, but wonderful energy. And those challenges and actions that you have shared directly inform our next speaker. And Pasha will now link NbS into our urgent priority, which is loss and damage. So I'll give this floor to Pasha now. Thank you, Pasha.
Good morning, still, oh no, afternoon, in here in Fiji, everyone. So I think the discussion was very good, if a little bit short. And now building on the presentations that we've already received, I wanted to speak briefly about leveraging nature-based solutions to address climate change loss and damage, looking at policy integration for Pacific resilience. Now, I recognize that looking through, oops, why isn't it advancing? Next slide, sorry. Looking at the group members, many of you are much better experts on this and could be giving this presentation yourselves. But I will try and give an overview, and hopefully it will stimulate discussion and questions and answers around. So I will touch briefly on understanding loss and damage in the Pacific context, looking at slow onset, rapid onset, and combined events, and then types of loss and damage, economic loss and damage, non-economic, and the fact that that's kind of a false distinction. And I wanted to give a specific example in the Pacific, where using fisheries, and just briefly mention tipping points and 1.5 degrees in the context of loss and damage and nature-based solutions, and a little bit on means of policy integration. So turning to the definition of loss and damage, there's no internationally accepted definition of loss and damage, but we have been working in the Pacific with sort of a working definition, looking at the impacts of climate change that cannot be or have not been avoided, basically through feasible adaptation or adaptation efforts, but also noting that they haven't been averted through a greenhouse gas mitigation action. So these are the impacts that we will feel or are already feeling in many cases. And when I talk about feasible, we're talking about cost and time. We could probably adapt to a lot more if we had more time and more resources. But in the absence of time and resources, there is already loss and damage being experienced. And one of the areas that, linking back to Anne-Claire's presentation about the international through national, under the Paris Agreement, there's a global goal on adaptation. And currently there's a lot of work about ecosystem and biodiversity adaptation indicators. And perhaps it's where the limits of those, and this is still an area of discussion and active research, where the limits of those are met or exceeded. If we're not reaching the indicators, the desirable indicators in time of the adaptation efforts, then we will be experiencing loss and damage. So focusing on losses, they're generally conceived as irreversible and permanent in nature. And some examples related to nature-based solutions are things like loss of marine species due to coral reef ecosystem collapse, perhaps from bleaching, acidification, repeatedly over time. Marine heat waves as well have an impact there. Loss of terrestrial species such as pollinators due to temperature, extreme heat or cyclones, or even loss of socioeconomic viability of a practice. One example is handicrafts. Some of the bags that have been traditionally woven, the species that are used are less available, subject to or being lost completely. There's efforts to restore or replace those species, but essentially the original practice has been lost, and there is both cultural non-economic losses, which I'll get into in a minute, and economic implications of that. Damages, of course, refer to recoverable or potentially repairable harm. So examples could be coastal ecosystems, coral reefs that could be restored, replanted, invasive species that might be eliminated through biocontrols or other methods, or in the case of displacement, interrupted teaching of traditional knowledge and practices, or preservation of, say, food preservation techniques due to temporarily being displaced. So those are the kind of damages we're talking about in this context. In loss and damage, we talk about slow onset and events and extreme weather events or extreme climate events. And as you look at this diagram, hopefully you can see it clearly, you'll see so many of these are related to nature-based solutions in the Pacific, as we've heard in previous webinars, on both extreme event side, things like nature-based solutions for floods and heat waves. I won't go into too much detail about that. I just wanted to note that the one aspect that perhaps we don't have much control of in the Pacific is the glacial retreat and related impacts like the melting permafrost in the north, but there are hopefully nature-based solutions that might help in other parts of the world as well. But for now, we're focusing on the Pacific. And so there's a lot of discussion about types of loss and damage and categorizing these and doing research on the kinds of loss and damage. This comes from the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. They put a loss and damage online guide, and the diagram on the sorry, right-hand side of the screen is how we've reworked this a little bit. When we think about economic losses, you can think about resources, services, and goods. And there's a list below it of some examples: damaged infrastructure, reduced crop yields, basically income reduction that can be measured in economic terms. But almost all the things that affect individuals, society, environment, and culture can be elaborated into economic loss. And a lot of the research has been on trying to put economic values to some of these kind of things, such as loss of land, the cultural value of the land. But I would argue that we need to look more at what it's going to cost to address some of these areas of non-economic loss. What we need more research on: how do we cost that and value it and invest in addressing non-economic loss as well as economic loss and damage. So I just wanted to give an example quickly, and noting that trying to keep to 10 minutes, but probably failing. So there's been a lot of research by SPC and other agencies recently on displacement of the tuna stock. You can see from the diagrams that they're under different scenarios. The fish, especially the pelagic fish species, are moving eastward across the Pacific. And the more severe the climate change scenario, the more that will be affected. And there is also biomass reduction. So this is a major issue for our Pacific region that relies on, I think it's 80% fish protein in our diets, so on average. So in some places, there might be a net negative, positive impact in the Eastern Pacific with the fish moving there. But these countries are not necessarily part of full members of parties to the Nauru Agreement and other policy tools that have set quotas around fish management and so forth. So this is where the policy linkages, global to local, do start to come in, and we need to look at some of the solutions for this. So the change in distribution, fish distribution, and this is both coastal and pelagic, is around the distances that fishers must travel, the time of year that fish are in a particular place, the catch rate and abundance. It also is having documented effects on the traditional knowledge that used to have a lot of mana. It might not be so applicable with shifts in climate and shifts in fish species due to climate changes. And so, of course, there's the economic loss and the profitability of the fishing fleets. So where does nature-based solutions come in here? Well, I've listed some examples, and as I mentioned previously, I'm aware that many of you on the call are much more involved in these kind of responses than I am. However, I just wanted to list mangrove and coastal wetland restoration, coral reef rehabilitation, community-based fisheries management, riparian buffer zones, and watershed restoration. And I'll leave it on the slide. I've listed the loss and damage alignment, and these are the kinds of things which will need to be highlighted if it's something that might address fishery collapse by enhancing fish nurseries, and it is a gray line between what is adaptation and what is loss and damage. But as climate impacts get worse, we definitely will be seeing both losses and damages, and we need to seek funding for actions to support it, and we need to be able to articulate the climate evidence base for them. So it's very good that this series of webinars is happening, and we're building our capacity in that regard. So, next slide. Okay, so just touching on the policy integration, I included some recommendations from various sources. Both UN, SCAB is doing a lot of work, but most importantly, I was in a webinar last night, and I think some of colleagues were on the call, and both Vanuatu, Chris Bartlett, and Fiji gave excellent presentations on nature-based solutions in the context of human mobility. And one example is the post-disaster environmental assessment, which has incorporated ecosystems services valuation. And it found that it was the costs of loss of ecosystem services was even greater than the direct cost of loss of infrastructure and damages. So that provides rationale behind using nature-based solutions and valuing our ecosystem services for that. And then Fiji has undertaken a very comprehensive community risk assessment regarding relocation of communities in the human mobility context, and they have it's really good to learn from, and I hope to be able to link their presentation somehow or their information, because I couldn't go into too much detail here unless they want to come in and discussion and add to these points. And we've already discussed integrating nature-based solutions into national climate change policies, and there's a need to strengthen our regional collaboration on nature-based solutions. There's many agencies and researchers working in the field, but there's so much to do. We just need to focus on those options to address it, and of course, enhance access to finance for nature-based solutions projects and programs, not just piecemeal projects, but long-term programs in communities. I just wanted to go back to the global level. These are some of the tipping points in the biosphere that are of concern. I did mention how the glacial ice sheets, but we have a lot of them in our region that are at local level around coral reef implications. And I've had discussions recently with both Palau and FSM representatives on the work that they want to do on looking at marine heat waves and things like that. And just tracking globally, we see that policies and action, as mentioned by Ron, the NDC targets could get us to there if they're to keep the temperature limit to 1.5, but beyond 1.5, there's going to be accelerated loss and damage and catastrophic loss and damage potentially. So we need to implement nature-based solutions to avoid, in loss and damage, we talk about averting through greenhouse gas mitigation, minimizing through adaptation actions, and addressing loss and damage that we're actually experiencing. So all three aspects are needed, and nature-based solutions have a key role to play in that. So thank you very much, and I leave you with the question, what can we do to minimize and address loss and damage with policy and integration of nature-based solutions? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pasha. You have shown how NBS can be a shield against loss and damage. So after this, we just have one last speaker, which is Kushal. Unfortunately, Kushal is a bit sick and he won't be able to present. So we have his recorded version that we will play now as his deliverables. But if you have any question regarding his presentation, then we'll take the question and we will revert it to them.
Good morning and Gulavinaka everyone. I'm sorry I'm not able to do this presentation online today because I'm down with dengue, but I wanted to quickly cover some summary points in terms of what the national policy processes are for integrating nature-based solutions in project implementation cycles. So basically the relationship between the international global conventions such as the Convention on Biological Diversity, the United Nations Framework on Climate Change Convention, and the many other fora that internationally provide policy guidance in terms of how nature-based solutions can be integrated at the domestic level, and then this is legally binding or in a way mandatory for countries to basically report to under the conventions. And one example is the nationally determined contributions under the UNFCCC. Nature-based solutions has come a long way in its identification as a tool for mitigating climate change, for adapting to coastal resilience, and providing for livelihoods. And today I will be looking at some of the summary recommendations in which we can play an important role by integrating NbS in domestic processes to be able to amplify the role of nature in combating, the temperature goal under the Paris Agreement, or be it the protection of biodiversity or the loss of biodiversity. We all know that the science is very clear. The IPCC has done a lot of work. Climate change is basically a current threat to our survival, and we face numerous catastrophic events every year in various parts of the region, and urgent action is needed to adapt to this, in particular for developing countries that don't have the resources to build the necessary resilience. Now, in terms of the history of NbS, it's not a new scientific concept. We all know that traditionally NbS has been incorporated in our traditional practices, in our customs, in our way of lives, basically through traditional knowledge systems, the use of sustainable resources, and the Pacific is a great example of having traditionally used nature-based solutions because of our connection to the ocean. Now, NbS is a great tool for adaptation. It can also provide mitigation co-benefits, but I will focus on adaptation given the context in the Pacific, right? So there are broad ways to define NbS under the concept of adaptation. The first one being ecosystem-based adaptation. So basically, this is where, we potentially have healthy ecosystems that strengthen biodiversity and support the niche, the ecological niche of, our, whether it's the marine or the terrestrial habitats. We have community-based adaptation. These are practical ways in which, communities, local indigenous peoples get together to intertwine and interweave NbS practices, such as nature-based seawalls, such as mangrove protection, conservation, and planting of mangroves, vetiver grass for coastal resilience, and so forth, into places where we live. And so for Fiji in particular, within coastal areas, this is where most of our population density is, right? And then we have locally led adaptation, which is a bottom-up approach. So it basically involves sub-national as well as the national government, and then we basically try and work around a governance mechanism so that the benefits of the communities is trickling down right from the grassroots level. And this helps to holistically address adaptation needs. In terms of the major global processes, I mentioned some fairly in the start of my presentation. We do have NbS being recognized by the World Bank in 2008, with further research going on, and then NbS was integrated into global conventions. We have CCC, CBD, we have the Global Goal on Adaptation. We are developing indicators for the adaptation, and now is the most crucial time that we can involve nature-based solutions and the ecosystems indicators for the GGA, be able to define global indicators for NbS, and then use this as an implementation tool to really look at how we use NbS in addressing climate change and biodiversity. And of course, I mentioned the science behind nature, different forms of habitats, mangroves, seagrasses, helping us sequester carbon. And then, there has been a shift from research to implementation. While debatable initially NbS, we are now implementing NbS in large scales. One example is the QI initiative in the Pacific region, and basically the use of QI regionally to drive more NbS. And great work has been done on this by IUCN and other regional partners. However, there exist, challenges in terms of implementation, in terms of the big financing gaps, and basically, knowledge management. Where do we integrate the right tools? Do we have the right tools? And so forth. So I will now talk about, from global into regional. Regionally, I mentioned, some programs that use NbS, and one good example is the Pacific NDC Hub, which is integrating NbS into climate policies and supporting the region. I mentioned the QI initiative, and there are multiple challenges, apart from funding, and it also includes land-based tenure, right? Financing constraints, capacity gaps to implement, strengthening partnerships between governments, NGOs, CSOs. So all this, is very new, and we need a collaborative approach to be able to align globally, regionally, and domestically. Now, we know the broad four conventions that basically talk about nature-based solutions. At the domestic level, we do have the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, the national adaptation plans, as well as the national development plans. And in the case of Fiji, the NDP also recognizes ecosystems, forest, and the need to conserve and protect these nature-based solutions, integrated in its adaptation policy, and be able to use NbS as a tool for fighting climate change and biodiversity loss. Now, in terms of, um, you know, how how we domestically implement NbS. So basically, the first process is to update existing principles. So using global policy recommendations, having lessons learned from regional projects, we can use principles of these reportings into our domestic policies and integrate some of the lessons. So it's continuously adapting, and revising our policies and plans. Fiji, for example, is revising its NDC, NEP, the National Ocean Policy this year. So it gives you really the avenue to include additional science, additional, NBS solutions and lessons from implementation. Second is to create, legislation. So policies are good and well, but they are only able to guide a aspiration of a particular country, and they're able to dictate, what is the context like, the scenario at the national level. But without having a legislative arm, we cannot really measure compliance. We cannot really look at, the ability to regulate, the ability to measure truly and enforce some of our policy outcomes. And this is why we need to create laws, also unlock funding. Funding is crucial. One example of regional funding happening right now is the UBPP, Unlocking Blue Prosperity partnership in the region. It's a great example of how NbS, protection of marine and terrestrial environments, can be incorporated and demonstrated from local policies. Having incentives. This is an important discussion, and mostly that happens through the Ministry of Finance, Treasury. In particular, how do we come up with new mechanisms of, having benefits to the environment, whether it's through taxes, be it through payment of ecosystem services, or be it through new incentives, new means to subsidize, the negative incentives or the negative effects on environment. For example, recalling fishery subsidies, ensuring that local communities get the most benefit and not empowering overseas companies, instead having MSC certification so that we increase the value of our local products, and that in fact leads to a better value chain addition. Um, Training, very critical. We do have capacity gaps, as we all know. We have institutional gaps. We have the inability at times to thoroughly implement. So training and capacity development is important. And lastly, sharing, whether it's regional lessons, whether it's inviting stakeholder consultation guests and agencies to speak about how they've implemented it in other regions, really, and trying to map your needs. Now, the in terms of the ways in which we can enhance NbS, number one is to enhance research funding. Universities, private NGOs and NGOs in the region do want to do research, but then the funding for research is extremely limited and it's contested. We need to have a whole of government, whole of society participatory approach, whether it's through stakeholder consultations, online participation, and written comments. We need to develop appropriate guidelines so that it guides what NbS indicators are for the country. Again, policy, we need to monitor and evaluate so that we measure the outcomes at the end of the day, and it's not a policy that is shelved for reference purpose, right? We need to have public awareness, so carrying out social media advocacy and so forth in simple layman language, so that our public understands how NbS can be rolled out at the community level. And lastly is to pilot projects. We are only able to demonstrate scale and replicability if we can pilot, contextualize, and then demonstrate, right? With that, then we can attract additional funding. We look at large scale funding and even doing regional projects for that matter. One example of NbS that I wanted to demonstrate from the national level, that is being used by the Fiji government, the Department of Waterways, with a lot of work and support from NGOs in Fiji, in particular IUCN, is the NbS seawall design. Conservation International is also contributing towards the engineering aspect of this NbS design. So it's basically looking at mangroves, boulders, vetiver grass to be able to build this strong coastal barrier to where our communities are, and then over time this barrier involving nature is able to become stronger and demonstrate and provide core benefits to the environment, such as through biodiversity credits, through carbon credits, through sequestration of carbon, supporting marine ecosystems, and so forth. So this is an example of how NbS can be used in comparison to traditional green-gray infrastructure. And Fiji has come a long way in demonstrating this. There have been a lot of projects that were completed. So, for example, in Namoli village, Dalikoni village, and as well as you can see from the pictures here before and after, how the NbS design basically improved coastal resilience and added a lot of core benefits from nature. Lastly, in terms of the way forward, um, we all know the importance of policy, so we need to strengthen policy, whether it's updating it, revising it, or having new policies and integrating NbS. Secondly, building the necessary capacity to be able to deliver and having local expertise to demonstrate NbS to secure funding, really. Otherwise, it's very difficult to ask for funding to roll out these programs. Engaging youth and community, we want to ensure we have a holistic approach. The NbS solutions are including local level adaptation. They are inclusive to those that are vulnerable and at the grounds level. And this is what true impact should be. And leveraging climate financing. So apart from looking at government grants, apart from working with NGOs, we should be able to co-finance with bigger multilateral pools of fund, whether it's the World Bank, the GCF, the Adaptation Fund, even bilateral funding through budget support and so forth. By demonstrating policy and legislative changes, we can ask for these kind of climate funding requests. And lastly, strengthening partnerships, being able to participate at the high level, demonstrating your needs, having the right awareness and advocacy, talking to various partners, and developing appropriate mechanisms to showcase how you can demonstrate NbS and implement it with success stories, I think is a great way to leverage partnership and be able to mobilize additional funding. With that, I would like to thank everyone, and we love Inaka. Thank you.
So that was a presentation from Kushal, and we would like to thank him. Despite being sick, he was able to record the session. And if you have any questions for Kushal, or please do direct it to me or put it in the chat box and he will get back to you. And now we have come to the final stage of our webinar presentation. And if you have any questions for the panels, the expert panels, please just keep put it in the chat box and we'll get back to you. And I have also posted a feedback link in the chat box, and if you could just fill it, and it helps us to improve on the next webinar. So please honestly feel that, and we will try to improve in the next one. So heartfelt thanks to all speakers for their expertise, and they took their time to develop the presentation, and to everyone here for making this session very dynamic and collaborative. What takeaway I could see for today's session is NbS is supported by global and regional policies, which is very strong. And now it's the time to actively integrate it into national strategies, which we are currently working on to dive into real impact. And also for successful mainstreaming, policy must guide practice and practice must inform policy. Strong coordination and shared learning is the key. And like I mentioned, please fill the feedback form so that we get the feedback from you, and link will be shared for post-webinar resources. So if you look at these post-webinar resources, if you have access to that, I know there's a lot of presentation and there's a lot of information. So we will share all the presentation with you. We have already done that for the first 2 webinars, including the recording. If you have missed anything or joined later, you can always go back to the recording that will be shared this week with the participants. And on that note, I also wanted to say that our speakers for this webinar, like, they are available for further discussion. If you have any questions, you can always email them. I will be also sharing the email so that the collaboration and the conversation with NbS keeps going. And apart from that, if you are joining, so this was a registered webinar session, and we did close the registration after the first webinar. And after that, if you are joining, that means, and you are not receiving the correspondence from me regarding these post-webinar agendas and other things, that means you are not in the registration list. So I'm requesting you, if you could just email me, and I will put you in the registration list. I know some of you missed out and you joined later, so the link is shared with you. So if you want more correspondence from us, I need to add you to the main registration list. So please just email me and then I'll add you there. So maybe if you are not receiving any correspondence from me, that would be the reason. And for the next webinar, we will have, that is on the 29th of April. This is also very important. In that webinar, we will be assessing the value of nature-based solution project into cost-benefit analysis, and for strategic design and impact. Now from policy, now we'll move to the tools, which is cost-benefit analysis. And this webinar is mostly with the GGI. They are getting to get this webinar together. So we hope to see you all in the next webinar on the 29th. I'll keep sending reminders. I think the link remains the same, but I will keep sharing the links with you. And thank you for joining. Let's keep this momentum going by applying what we have learned in our local context. And please share the resources that we share with you. And stay tuned for post-webinar materials. And we look forward to seeing you in our next session. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and you have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rakeshni. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day. Happy Easter.
Thank you. Thank you. Happy Easter to everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.